Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Roadmap to Resilient Teams webinar. My name is Kaylee Hansen. I'm the Marketing Campaigns Manager here at GoCo, and I am so excited to be sponsoring this webinar alongside Checkr with these incredible speakers that we have today. A couple little housekeeping things. If you have any questions at all during the webinar, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I will be sharing the recording after the webinar. So if you can't stay for the whole thing or need to jump midway through, no worries, we got you. To start getting the chat rolling a little bit, we love chat engagement during these sessions. So to get that rolling a little bit, I'm not going to ask the typical, like, where are you from or anything like that. I want to know. I've had about 2 cups of coffee already this morning. I want to know what your go-to morning drink order is. So share in the chat whether it's, a nice hot cup of tea or just water. I wish it was water for me, but share in the chat what your go-to order is. Kelly, what is your go-to morning drink order? Oh, Kelly, I think you're on mute.
Yep, I just put it in the chat. I love a iced vanilla sweet cream cold brew. It's actually sitting right here.
Love
Oh,
that.
I'm a caffeine coffee junkie. That's my one vice. I love it.
Love it. So are you, and I'll go to you, Sloan and Becky next, but Kelly, I have to know, are you an iced coffee all year long type of person?
Yes, it's 27 degrees here in the Dallas area, as you, I think, know, Kaylee,
Yeah.
and I still am drinking my ice.
I love that. It's okay because I'm hot coffee all year, even when it's
All year.
100 degrees in
Oh,
DFW.
we're
So
opposite.
we're
Okay,
opposite.
okay.
We balance each other out. That's why I love these. What about you, Sloan? What's your go-to order?
Yeah, my go-to order at home is just a latte, hot latte. Always is my first one. If I make a second one, and I do prefer ice in the afternoon or like a midday pick me up. If I'm out and grabbing a coffee, I'll go for a dirty chai.
I love that.
I
I love
can't
a
that at
good
home.
pie.
Mhm.
That's lovely. What about you, Becky? What's your go-to order in the morning?
I actually do not drink coffee, so I am the water person. I drink water, and every once in a while, I'll do like a small cup of like orange juice or apple juice or something, just for mixing it up. But yeah, I keep it simple.
I love that. Like I said, I envy you. I wish I was a water person. I do have some right now, but first thing in the morning, I have to get like a little latte or a coffee just to pick me up, get ready for the day. So, thank you all for answering and continue to put in the chat what your morning drink order is, where you're from. If you have any thoughts during the webinar, if there's something that one of our speakers says that really resonates to you, or maybe you have a different point, feel free to add that in the chat. We love to hear all thoughts and opinions. I will also be sending the SHRM and HRCI codes into the chat and on screen at the very end of the webinar, so be on the lookout for that as well. And with that, let's get started. I want to start with some introductions. So we've heard a little bit from Kelly, Sloan, and Becky about their go-to order in the morning, but I want to learn a little bit more about each of y'all. So Becky, do you want to kick us off and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Becky Taggart. I am the People Operations Manager here at GoCo. I've been with GoCo a little over 4 years in a lot of capacities. I used to be on our client success team and spent a lot of my career kind of working on implementing and getting our clients set up. And then over the last year have been more specifically in our, excuse me, People Ops team. And just, very excited to be here and have a great chat about resilient teams with Kelly and Sloan and Kaylee today.
Yay, thank you. I'm super excited to have you here too, Becky. Sloan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I am Sloan Tollison. I work for Checkr and I am a senior technical recruiter here. Have been at Checkr just over 2.5 years, so I've really seen us grow, especially over the past few years. And then I'm based in Denver.
I love
Yeah.
that. Thank you so much, Sloan. I'm so excited to have you here today. And you do work with our partner Checkr, who is sponsoring this webinar with GoCo. So thank you to everyone who came from the Checkr side too and is attending this webinar today. Kelly, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Such an honor to be here today. My name is Kelly Simance. I am from the Dallas area, originally from Seattle, and I've been in HR for over 25 years. So I have worked for big companies like Starbucks, actually. I was a director of HR for Starbucks years ago, and now I am a individual HR consultant. I work for a firm called Texas HR Team, and I also have a resume writing business called My Resume Team. So have my hands in a little bit of a different different industry there with career coaching for candidates. So yeah, I've spent 25 years in HR, excited to be here today.
Yay, I'm so excited for this conversation. We had a prep session earlier this week, and let me just say, y'all are in for some really great time, some really great advice, some good examples. So I'm so excited to have the three of you here today. And I did just share all of their LinkedIns in the chat if you'd like to connect with any of them during the webinar or post-webinar. And with that, let's kick this thing off. I'm so excited. So at first, when we're starting this off, I kind of want to set the stage about what resilience is and why it matters. So, Sloan, I'm actually going to kick off with you if that's okay. Why is resilience such a critical trait for teams, especially as we're just now coming into 2025?
Yeah, great question. And so glad that we're starting here today. I mean, it's probably no surprise to this group of HR professionals that over the past few years, one of the main constants is change. And with so much change, building a resilient team, enabling them to be able to shift that mindset to almost embrace the change has really at least helped the Checkr team navigate through those changes while also keeping up momentum on those larger goals.
I love that. And Kelly, you've also had quite a bit of experience in the HR industry. How has resilience become, like, over the years, such a critical trait for you, do you think?
Yeah, it's a make or break skill, honestly, to have these days, especially post-pandemic. Everybody had to really rise up and level up, and the businesses that did really well at that succeeded, quite honestly. And that made it was every single level of an employee in an organization, not just leadership, right? And so it took every player on a team to be resilient in order to row in the same direction and really be strong to ride the waves of the economy and of all the things that happened, during the pandemic. So yeah, resiliency is, one of the number one things that I see successful teams embrace. They have to these days.
Yeah, definitely have to. And Becky, I know that obviously GoCo, we work in technology, and how has like that been like such a key player and like the critical trait like of resilience?
Yeah, it's everything, really. As they stated as well, technology is changing, the world around us is changing constantly. Even like the way we work, 30, 40 years ago, people would have careers at the same company for 10 and 20 and 30 years. And these days, most of us are changing every couple of years. So those changes, not just to the technology and your processes, the people that are on the teams, they just those consistent changes, you have to build resilience into your processes and your teams to be able to combat those and meet those challenges and not see drops to productivity or efficiency or any of that every time you see one of these little changes come in, because it's, I would say, happening even more frequently than once a year. So all the time we've got to be tackling it.
I love that answer. Speaking of changes, changes come with a lot of pressure for organizations. So, in your experience or what you've seen in the industry, what are some key elements that separates like those truly resilient teams for those from those that do struggle under that pressure and under those changes? And Becky, I'm actually going to start with you first since you're the one who was kind of chatting about change.
Yeah, to me, I think the kind of making sure you have a nice, like, transparent culture, that feedback cycle in place, it really kind of raises the ability of your employees to feel comfortable, raising their concerns. It opens the communication in both directions so that, when those changes come along, there's a lot of clear communication about, what's being changed, why is it changing, what are we viewing as successful in this, and kind of moving forward from there. And when you really encourage that transparency and that feedback, I think it helps a lot to maintain that resilience because you're obtaining really the buy-in from the people on the team. Like, they're involved in the process, they feel connected to it. And so I think that really stands out as like an element that helps those types of teams succeed where others might kind of fall apart when they're not talking to each other and not kind of unifying around a mission.
I love that. Kelly, do you have any thoughts on this? Because I know that in our practice session, we talked a lot about how like leadership matters in that too. Could you maybe go a little deeper into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could spend a whole webinar just on this question alone, I think, and it's something that I am certainly passionate about because when I see leadership, I see it as something that each of us are accountable for, not just executives, not just managers of people, but every single employee can be a leader in their own way that contributes to the organization. And so, yeah, it's not just an individualized, people leader type of thing that you need to focus on. In my opinion, it's, like I said, a collective type of deal. So the companies and the clients that I work with that succeed, they're all in, they hold each other accountable. There's no excuses. And that's just built into their DNA, and they have that positivity too, that if there's a setback or there's change, they embrace it rather than, pushing back. So,
Love it. Sloan, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, great answers from both Becky and Kelly, plus one to like that transparency, communication, that like being empowered to be a leader, even if you are not a leader entitled, to Kelly's point. The only thing I think I would add here is, teams that I've worked on that are very resilient have a little bit of like that extra like oomph in terms of adaptability and flexibility, along with, I would say, a good healthy dose of optimism and being able to see challenges more as opportunities versus something else that they have to overcome.
I love that. Kelly, I saw you came off mute. Did you have anything that you wanted to like add to that?
oh, no, I was just preparing for the next question.
Oh, I love it. Perfect. So speaking of next question, I'd
Yeah.
like to get a little bit more into the weeds about like the whole process. There's a big employee life cycle journey that starts before they're even an employee at your company. So I want to start off by the hiring process. So how does transparency in the hiring and even the screening process really set that foundation for trust within a team? I mean, people get a first impression of you before they really even start with you. So, Kelly, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, transparency leads to that two-way conversation that is so critical these days to make sure the candidate and the employee is heard, that communication is clear, concise, transparent. And there are so many companies that are struggling with this. Communication is the number one challenge still, in the workplace. It's been that way my entire HR career. And so I think transparency is critical to have as a value if you're wanting to have a company that is open, and honest and transparent. And something that I've seen successful companies do is have, the regular cadence with their manager and employee in a one-on-one and set that tone from the very, start of the process from the time the employee is hired, and have town halls for your teams, where leadership are answering questions honestly, right? And so lots of different techniques that people can put into practice, even if you're a small business. You don't have to be a huge business to implement some of these strategies that we're talking about today. So yeah, transparency is everything in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. And before I go on to Sloan with this question, I think like even putting that stuff out on your website or like even it can come to like blogs from your employees, outlining their like the transparency and their commitment to that. I think that when I've been at GoCo for 2 years, but before that, whenever I was researching new companies, the first thing I went to was like their website to check out, what they've posted about themselves and how transparent they are. And so I think that is a really great answer and ties in really well, Kelly. So thank you. Sloan, you work on the
Yeah,
recruiting side.
I
How
do,
does how
Haley.
does that transparency in the hiring and screening process really set that foundation? I'm sure you deal with that every single day and try to improve on that every day.
We do, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And love, that you've been mentioned, first impressions are everything, can really help set the scene and manage those expectations so that there aren't any surprises throughout, especially that hiring and interviewing process, so that then, that builds that trust before they even become an employee, before their first day. And so, it's a two-way street also. These transparent conversations need to be not only about like the process that they're going to be going through, what to expect in terms of the interview process, but also like, what are they looking for? And so, I encourage like other recruiters and HR leaders to like dig in and make sure there's that mutual connection for that longer term fit, and making sure that they're going to align with the culture, the needs of the role. Um, yeah, all starting from the beginning to help build that foundation of trust.
All starting from the beginning. Exactly. Becky, did you have thoughts on this before we get more into the weeds of like background checks and things?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Sloan. Like the transparency really comes from the beginning. It's kind of the way that we're setting the expectations early with any of our prospects on how the company functions, how potentially their teams are going to function. It's giving them their first look at the culture too. It's the introduction. So the way that we communicate, how quickly we respond, each of those interpersonal interactions that are happening, whether it's with the recruiter or a hiring manager, anybody else, like every single one of them is having an impact on how the prospect is viewing the culture too. And so as we go through that process, we're almost making like a promise to them that, hey, if you come work for us, this is what you get. And so, that transparency, it can set the stage for success for that employee where they know what they're getting into early, and also kind of protects on the other end that you don't find out later, maybe it wasn't such a fit and that employee isn't, going to enjoy what the culture is like at that company. And then, it obviously costs a lot of money to hire people. So, you lose out if you're not being transparent and upfront about it.
I love that. The cost part is really interesting too, because a lot of the times you hear like, oh well, I think that we should do it this way, but how do I get my leadership buy-in to make these process changes or updates? And so I think that the cost part is a really good thing to add. And we'll talk more about leadership later. I won't get ahead of myself, but that was great. Thank you all so much for that. I want to dig a little deeper just because Checkr does background checks, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about kind of setting that expectation and that trust from like background checks. So, Sloan, I'd love to start with you. Background checks can sometimes be seen as a barrier rather than like that tool for trust. So, how can leaders, whether it's HR or admins doing HR tasks or leadership that has to do HR tasks, how can leaders reframe them being background checks to enhance trust rather than diminish it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great question. I mean, background checks for a lot of candidates can be really intimidating. And so we as HR leaders or just, part of hiring teams, we can really, reframe the background checks to focus more on trust by not only, theme of transparency today about, what the purpose is, what is being screened, but also emphasizing the consistency that is used in the decisions if something does come up on a candidate's background check. How are those decisions made internally? Involving the candidates in the background check process as well, I think can really help build trust, as long as you're not doing it too early in the process. I think that you want to be careful not to violate any sort of like local regulations by asking about it directly or talking about it too early in the process, where then like a candidate might get a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth. But again, starting with transparency and just like having that openness to explain and set the expectations of the candidate can really set that foundation of trust.
I love it. Kelly, what are your thoughts on this? Because I'm sure that you've run into a lot of background check situations with companies that you've worked with or consulted with in the past.
Yeah, so it absolutely is imperative to make sure the candidate knows what the process is and the timing of it too, because like Sloan was saying, it can be intimidating. And so if you're not communicating to the candidate, we expect to hear back within probably a week or whatever the time frame is, right? They're wondering what is going to go on, especially if they do have something on their record. And so I think, again, transparency and having that dialogue with candidates is so critical these days to make sure they understand, what the process is if something does show up on, a record, for example, so that they aren't left wondering and hanging. And a lot of times candidates are waiting to give notice to their current employer until the background check is run. And so it really is a stressful time for them. I have people tell me all the time, like, I think my background's clear, but, this makes me nervous. And I'm like, I know it's okay. Thank you for expressing that to me. We'll work through this with you. And having that protocol in place from the company level is absolutely critical too.
I love that. That reminds me of like, when you're driving down the highway and you see a cop car and you're like, oh no, I did something illegal. Like I know I didn't do anything, but that's funny. That's what that made me think of, Kelly. So
100%, yeah. Or maybe it was 8 years ago and they're like, is it going to show up on the record? Because it's a 7-year mark, that usually is on the records, right? And so, yeah, there's just a lot of unknowns with the process. So you can put people's minds at ease a lot if you just have an open conversation with them.
yeah, definitely. And I'd like to go back to you, Kelly, for this next question too. What are some best practices that organizations can adopt to ensure that those background screening processes are fair and effective?
Yeah. So absolutely having protocol in place as to what is a tolerable, type of offense or record that might show up on the background check and what is permissible, for the company. Depends on the industry sometimes, depends on the job for different safety concerns. And so I've worked with a lot of clients that have never experienced this before, where they may have, not had a candidate come through that had a record. And so if they don't have protocol in place, it's really dicey to know, like, what are y'all gonna do, because we don't have anything in process yet. So absolutely having protocol in place for what's acceptable, what's not, will help you eliminate that risk too, from the company perspective, and just treat everybody equitably, fairly through the process.
Definitely. There can be a lot of gray area. So setting those expectations
Mm-hmm.
crucial. What about you, Sloan?
Yeah, 100% to, Kelly's point around there's a lot of gray area. And if this is, your first time as a business owner interacting with a candidate who's been just as impacted, what do you do? How do you handle that adjudication process correctly? And so working at Checkr in particular, we've tried to help create a lot of guidelines for our customers to not only help create that efficiency and consistency, but also reduce some of like the manual effort and time for reviewing background check reports. And so we have a product called Assess where it can actually help you based on the guidelines that you set for your specific business and need that can help you reduce the time that you're spending reviewing records and really only reviewing the records needed for that are relevant to the roles that you're hiring for. It can reduce time spent there by like 40 to 80%, depending on what product you're using. And then to the fairness point, that is super close to us here at Checkr. Fairness has been embedded in our mission since we were founded. Almost 1 in 3 Americans have been involved with the justice system at some point in their life. And so we really, promote that inclusivity and thinking, encouraging our, businesses that work with us help think about, fairness from that sense. And so one of the products that we've also built into our background check is called candidate stories, where if a candidate something comes up on their background check report, they can, before we send that to the employer, we'll actually reach out to them to see if they want to share more about their story, how they've grown, since that time, to give their, prospective employer a more holistic vision of them and where they are today.
I love that. Before we did our little prep session earlier this week, I didn't even know that it was like a 7-year gap for background checks, and people can change a lot in 7 years. They can become completely different and grow and evolve. So I love thinking about like taking those fair, effective actions to make sure that they're represented in the proper light and the light that they deserve. So I love that. Well, yay. That was great. I love talking about, the post or the pre-hiring because again, sets the foundation for your employees' opinion of you and your company, so making it a lot easier and stress-free on them. I'd like to talk about now once the candidate is an employee. So how can technology, HR technology, tools, etc., really help maintain accountability and alignment across teams now that they're a part of your team? And Becky, I'm actually going to go to you first for this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. I think it's a great question. And The short answer is everything's at your fingertips, right? For both the employee and for HR, even the manager in certain circumstances, depending on what permissions and access they have. You know, everyone's on the same page about personal details, performance, pay. Obviously, GoCo is an HRIS. We use our own product ourselves every day. And it just makes it so easy to just find everything, right? No longer is there just like this mysterious file cabinet in the back of somebody's office that's locked up. One or two people has the key, and you're emailing asking for the copy of the document you signed back in onboarding. It could have taken hours or even days to get that. Now it's, if an employee needs a copy of their employee handbook that they acknowledged and they want to see when they acknowledged it, there it is. On GoCo, at least, it's right there. Open the documents folder, you can find it. And so it just makes it a lot easier. Everybody's aligned on what's going on, everyone's accountable. I know we use our onboarding process very specifically. We have a workflow. And so even just the onboarding can go so much faster. You don't have to print all the papers out and sit at a conference table for a couple of hours walking through everything. It's already lined up. You've set up exactly what you want to include in the onboarding. You don't have to print it. You just hit the button and say, assign this to this new prospect or this new employee now. And it takes 15 minutes, maybe 20 if you have a lot of documents for them to go through. And it's just that quick to get people onboarded. And so everybody's accountable, everyone can see everything. We're all aligned on what has been done and not done. And I just find it's just so much easier with the technology in place.
I love that. And I also think about from just an employee perspective, I feel like I would see that my company has trust in me, whether it is, of course, we're GoCo, we love our HRIS, but just any tools that make it to where your employee can kind of, do things in their time and at their pace. And if my address changes, I can, like, my company trusts me to update it. And so it just
Yeah,
adds
or
that.
if you want to change your tax information or where you're getting your pay at, all of it's just like right there, and you don't essentially have to ask for permission to update it.
Yeah, because your company trusts you to do it yourself. So I love that. Kelly, what are your thoughts on once an employee or once a candidate becomes an employee, how technology can help in that process?
Yeah, absolutely. To add on to what Becky was saying, the onboarding process is critical again these days because it sets the impression for what that experience is going to be like for the employee as a new hire. So they're going to make up their mind in the first 30, 60, 90 days what they feel about you as an employer, and they're going to love you or they're going to hate you. And if they have a really rocky onboarding experience and they can't get their payroll set up right, or just heavy paperwork that they have to send back somewhere, print and return and all this stuff, that's clunky. And clunky doesn't feel good to people these days. And so candidates and new hires absolutely want that seamless experience that you all offer, from an HRIS perspective. So it's definitely going to set the tone for the employer brand that you want to convey. I've actually seen people that have posted, look what they did for me on my first day. Everything was put together. I was onboarded quickly and I was ready to get to work, right? So they'll talk about your brand in the marketplace too, if they have a great experience. And on the flip side, they'll talk about if it was a mess. And then that's part of your employer brand too, that you're trying to protect, right? So really, really important.
For sure. It kind of reminds me of like a blind date or a first date, like speed dating situation. That's
Yeah,
funny. Uh,
yeah.
Awesome. I love that. And Kelly, I'm going to go back to you for this next question. How can organizations balance the need for like accountability with that flexibility, that autonomy to keep employees engaged, empowered, and just feeling like they're being trusted?
Yeah. Um, Flexibility is the number one characteristic that employees are looking for in their next employer or in their current employer. And so every time I talk to a candidate when I'm recruiting, that is usually their number one question. And I'm sure you all would agree that flexibility these days is just so really important. And so having accountability, like you're talking about, Kaylee, where the company trusts you, and that ownership feels awesome. You're empowered to do your job. You have the tools you need. They've empowered you to do it, and you can get to work. You're not held back by systems that aren't working or technologies that aren't working for you. So yeah, I think it's so important to have flexibility in systems, processes, just how you structure work for people these days.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And Becky, I know that you're people ops manager here at GoCo, so you probably deal with this a lot. What are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything Kelly said as well. I think it comes down to remembering that, they're people. They're people first, and they have lives outside of what they're doing for you as a company. And so I feel like knowing where are the places where you really need to be strict, whether it's because there's legal requirements around it or there's liability related to it, you know where those lines are. And then looking at the rest and understanding that, like, sometimes it's going to be okay to be flexible with it. Maybe there's a particular individual need or a situation where you want to be a little more flexible, maybe give like a little extra of a time off to help somebody deal with a situation, or hear them a little bit further and understand what's going on. It gives this sense of trust and engagement to the employee to feel like, oh, my company sees me as a person. I'm not just a head count or a seat filled here. I am, they value me, the individual, not just the stuff that I'm doing every day. So that goes a long way, I think, to help them feel like they're connected and they're part of the company, and feel that sense of camaraderie with the people they work with every day and with their management.
Oh, this is so good. I can't believe we're already at the halfway point. I feel like I could talk to y'all for hours about this. But I want to move on to the next section about creating a culture where transparency, trust, accountability all thrive. Before we move on to the question, just wanted to remind the audience, if you have any questions that you'd like answered during this webinar, feel free to add them into the Q&A and we will get to them at the end. But my next question, Sloan, I'd actually like to go to you for this one first, if that's okay. What are some common mistakes that you've seen organizations make or that you've heard about organizations make when trying to build that culture of trust and accountability? Because there's a lot of moving parts that go into it. So what are some mistakes you've seen or heard?
Yeah, I mean, great point, Keely, around there's a lot of moving parts, and small things that can go wrong and break that trust or accountability, within your team. And so two mistakes that like quickly come to mind is actually the flip side of what Becky and Kelly were just speaking about, is that lack of empowerment, not giving employees the autonomy and the resources that they need in order to succeed is only going to hinder their accountability and their confidence in being able to fulfill what is needed for them. And so without that sense of like ownership, control that they, over their work, and that they have all the resources that they need, they're not going to be as closely tied to those end results, or those goals that they're working on. So that's a big one. And then the other one is, around all I hope everyone here is engaging with employees, asking for feedback, after they join, 60, 90 days in, or even just doing like annual or biannual engagement surveys. But if you are going to do those, that is where I've seen trust really fall and break down as well. If you're going to seek feedback, you have to act on it or show that you've heard employees and put some sort of action plan behind it. Because if they're going to share feedback and it's not going to be actioned on, it's just going to erode away that trust, and they're not going to want to share that again in the future.
For sure. Those are very great points. I love that. Sloan, Kelly, what are your thoughts on that? Because like we said earlier, you've worked with a lot of different companies in a lot of different ways. What are some common mistakes that you've seen?
Yeah, the number one mistake that I do see companies make in this regard is they say on their website one thing about their mission, about their values, about their culture, and then the employee starts day one and they're like, this is not what I was sold through the interview process as a candidate. And so there's a huge disconnect. And not just in the first, day, of course, it might be months down the road where the new hire is like, wait a second, this is not aligning, with the values and the culture that they told me about. And so that is what I see the biggest challenge companies have with culture, is that they mean well, they want to do the right thing or they want to say the right thing, but then their actions or even one particular person can derail that. And so again, I sound like a broken record with this, but it's up to every single person in an organization to protect culture. And what Sloan was saying is so critical to make sure that they feel empowered in that way too. Protect the culture together. So.
No broken records here. We can keep all these points as much as we want because they're very crucial. So thank you, Kelly. Becky, what's your take on this question?
Yeah, I think one of the most common mistakes I've seen is kind of like not knowing what really creates a culture. Because I mean, we've seen the memes go around about organizations think culture is pizza parties and t-shirts and all of that. It's really interesting though, because those things are still part of it. They're important. We just have to think of them as like the little sprinkle on top of an already great culture. I mean, Kaylee, we had a whole week last week where we were having great fun. We were talking before about, we did a whole bracelet making activity, and like that's fun stuff, but it only works because we have the culture underneath it. And I think that stems from really having leaders and managers at the company, be visible, bring that culture and the values that they talk about forward and actually live them every day. Because when you do that, you're giving kind of that example for the employees to emulate. They can see what it looks like to live the values, to be a part of the culture. And it kind of creates that buy-in. Again, I'm going to say buy-in again here. But they're buying into that culture, and now they know what it looks like. They can start living it. And so the next time, the t-shirts are coming around for new swag, it's exciting because it's like, I'm excited to be here. I love my culture. Give me the t-shirt so I can rep it. That I think, is the difference there. And the big mistake is like kind of thinking of those little pieces as, the culture, when really they're just like that extra piece to really enhance what already exists.
Yes, I love that. You want people to be excited to represent your culture and your company. I mean, I wear my GoCo shirt proudly to the grocery store because I love working here. So, very crucial points. I also think about, leadership and management when it comes to making a culture. How do leadership and management styles really influence a team's ability to be resilient? Becky, do you have any thoughts on this one?
I feel like I kind of said a lot of it there, but like, I mean, we really look at, there's some companies where you get the email from the CEO, once or twice a year, kind of like putting all the buzzwords in for what the values are, but to truly actually like see that person, whether it's a big company or a small company, um, you know, putting those values out there, even though they're at the top, it doesn't feel like there's, separation or like me, the employee versus, what I'm expected to do versus what my leaders up at the top are expected to do. It doesn't feel like a separation. It feels more like, we're all in this together. We're all living the same thing. So that's the only thing I think I would add is just like, be part of the team, top to bottom.
Yeah, be part of the team. Don't just rely on those buzzwords or those once a year messages to think that you're like doing the best. So I love that. Kelly, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Becky just said because a lot of times, CEOs or executives do think that, they're just checking the box with that email that, sprinkles in the values and let's live it out and all that. And they may not know, really important employees' names at the end of the day. And so that individualized approach to leadership is, my favorite thing to help leaders, especially these days, understand because it does matter that you know people's names. It does matter that you know how they want to be recognized. Do they want public praise? Do they want private recognition? All of those things matter. And so it's not just a one fits all approach to leadership. It's, customizing it per employee. And so if you're a people leader watching, one of the tools that I love to implement as an HR practice is to have an onboarding form, and so that employee can tell you what their favorite candy bar is or what their favorite coffee is. How they do like to be recognized. Would they rather have time off as a reward for, kicking butt in a project, or would they rather have a financial bonus or something like that, right? Everybody is a little bit different in how they prefer to be recognized for their hard work. And a lot of times I do see companies that, they'll just do like a golf outing for everybody. Well, I don't golf and I don't love that. And so for me, that's not going to be super rewarding. Send me to the spa I'm going to work my butt off, right? So I think just, coming up with that form is super helpful to have a process for every single employee that's onboarded so that the people leaders in HR know, what makes everybody tick.
I love that. Yeah, no two people are the same. And at GoCo, we use Clifton Strengths a lot. I don't know if anyone else has used Clifton Strengths, but that's also a great way for me, just as an employee, to get to know my coworkers and, their styles. Like I'm the person who puts exclamations at the end of every sentence and emojis. And so sometimes when that's not reciprocated, I'm like, oh my gosh, someone just despises me. I can't do this. So it's really interesting to then like learn my coworkers or even my leaders, my CEOs' Clifton strengths to see how they work best and be able to adapt the way that I communicate and appreciate them that way. So I love that. Sorry, rambled a minute there, but Sloan, what are your thoughts on leadership and management's take on it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything that's already been said, especially around the onboarding document and getting that understanding up front of how do we like to work? How do your employees like to work? How do they, to Kelly's point, want to be recognized? How do they want to hear feedback in a one-on-one, or do they want, written communication? And then also, like taking that even a step further and how you're personalizing not only like learning and development opportunities. One size fit all is not right for every employee. And so conferences, online courses, like exploring different avenues there, again, to make sure that they have the resources that they need in order to succeed or can grow their skills in order to be successful and build that resilience. And, even just like within supporting and creating that supportive environment on your team, what is the inner team dynamic as well? Do they see their peers as like trusted resources and a safe space that they can go to and speak through challenges that they're facing and be able to collaborate and come up with those solutions together versus feeling like you're all on your own?
Man, what a good conversation, y'all. I'm loving this. This is so good. I'm actually going to go a little bit off our question script for a second. We have a Q&A question actually, that is very similar to a question that I was wanting to ask anyway. So, I'm going to open this up to any of the three of you if you want to chime in, but Chandra asked, how can you best regain trust if it has been lost? Or and also not just lost, but maybe even broken. So whoever wants to start with this one, I'll open it up.
Yeah, I love this. I can start with that question because I see it every day, and it's what I help employees and leaders navigate to. Because trust, unfortunately, is broken. We're humans, and no one's perfect. The first step, in my opinion, is for a company, especially at the leadership level, to acknowledge that there is broken trust. Right? It's the elephant in the room. Employees are talking about it. I guarantee you, right? There's water cooler conversation going on around that, even virtually. And so it's important to just call it what it is and say, we acknowledge that things have been messy and broken. And at a leadership level, we want to do better. And we need your feedback, you guys, as employees, what can we as leaders do better? On the flip side, as an employee, if you have broken trust, with your leadership team or with your, people manager that supervises you, that is tough, right, to navigate. And so there is accountability and ownership from the employee level too, that, there needs to be that conversation about how to course correct. That's one of my favorite terms, like let's course correct together. No one's perfect. But how do we make this a more positive experience for everybody? Now, sometimes it's the toxicity is too far gone. And that's where I also recommend, if you're that employee or you have if you're a people leader and you have that employee on your team, that can be cancerous in an organization. And so a lot of people are afraid to navigate that and to tackle a challenging employee situation, but it's spreading into the rest of the group. And so that can be really tough to navigate. So all sorts of different angles to look at that question. So hopefully that touched on a little bit of what she was asking about in the question there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And Becky, I see that you went off mute. Do you want to add to this Q&A
Yeah.
question?
I just wanted to say I completely agree with Kelly on this, and it's kind of like your first instinct is almost to feel like, oh, hide it away, push it away. We didn't do anything wrong, but you really want to lean into the mistakes, be vulnerable vulnerable about it and just, if something went wrong, acknowledge it and start talking to people and look for the solution. Don't just let it sit, because if you let it sit, it's going to fester. And, not to equate it to medication or anything, but then you've got a real infection going and it's just going to spread. So, yeah, I definitely 100% agree. You have to like lean into it and start working on it right away.
Yeah, that's great because I feel like, it's hard to sometimes bring those things up, but in the end, showing that you're willing to be open and honest and forthcoming, it just builds that trust. It's like a big cycle. So I love it. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Chandra, for that question. Keep the questions coming if anyone else has any. But can y'all share an example with me? Of a company that you've seen or worked with that has successfully built resilience into its team culture? Like what strategies worked for them? Because, it's not the easiest thing to, you're not going to snap your fingers and it's just going to be perfect. So, Becky, can I start with you on this one?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't talk about GoCo here because I love the culture here and I think we've really built some great resilient teams over time. As I mentioned earlier, I started over 4 years ago. We had something like maybe 45 employees and we're hovering around 150 now and have had huge growth and lots of change over all of that time. And so what I've seen work the best is, again, it kind of goes back to leadership being clear, right? It's the communication, being transparent about the direction we're going, why we're going that direction, the reason behind the changes that are being made, really kind of helps push things forward. I think I'll use kind of like a specific example that's for one of our departments, but like over the last year, they've had even within that one department and a couple of the teams, tons of growth, like lots of change to who's on the team, what they're doing, the systems they're using, the processes. And so they put into process, we're going to have a pretty much a weekly meeting. They're meeting almost every week and they're talking about what's going well for us right now, what's not going well, what are we unsure about. If leadership has decided to make a change, it's here are the changes we're making. Let's talk about it. Here's why we're making the change, and here's what we expect from you in this change. Here's how we're defining success. We want to hear your feedback. And so again, it goes back to that feedback of having the open communication and having the buy-in. That is where I really see the success and what works the best is just having those spaces for people to contribute and be a part of the solutions.
For sure, having that open dialogue instead of just being like, this is what's happening, deal with
Yeah,
it, you know?
absolutely.
I love that. Kelly, I know that you've had similar experiences where you've worked with companies that have grown pretty quickly. What's your take on this question?
Yeah, so from the get-go, an example of this is I have a client that has gone from 5 to 50 employees in a year, very fast-paced, high growth, supply chain manufacturing. And from the get-go, the leadership team committed that they would never ask their team members to do something they wouldn't do. And that means when there's a influx in sales and production at the warehouse, they are all hands on deck, and the VPs and the CEO are making boxes together. There is nothing beneath them. And so really having that servant leadership mentality from the start is imperative. And it's never too late for that. A lot of times people are like, oh, but the company's been around for 100 years and stuck in their ways. No, reset button. Things can be done differently, and that change management can happen. It takes time if it's something that's been problematic for a long time. But servant leadership, but hands down, is going to benefit so many companies these days and employees.
Yeah, it takes time, but every day is a step forward to the positive change. So I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so sad we only have 12 minutes left. Like it's
No, how did that happen?
time flies. So I'm going to kind of round out this conversation with just a couple last questions, and then I promise everyone we will get you the Sherman HRCI codes toward the end of the webinar when we're all done answering. But Sloan, I'd love to ask you this question first, if you're okay with that. For HR teams that are looking to build or strengthen resilience in their organization, what are some first steps that they should take after this webinar?
Yeah, great question. I mean, to again, like what Becky and Kelly were both saying, it's about having the conversation. So starting internally, to whether it through conversation, through an engagement survey, just to better understand and get like a pulse check on how employees are feeling, where they are today. Do they need more support in certain areas? So that then you can start the conversation around what we need to do next. And again, like make sure that if you are going to ask for feedback and open up these conversations, that then you're taking the action or considerations that the employees are discussing. That's a great place to start.
I love it. What about you, Kelly? What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think any organization should consider doing an employee opinion survey of some sort to get that feedback, having be an anonymous approach, where people can feel comfortable saying, what's on their minds. The important part about that is to actually communicate back to the employees that, they received the data, what's the action plan from that data that they're going to use in order to make change. I see a lot of companies that will do an employee opinion survey and then do nothing with it, unfortunately. And so communicating at least back to the employees what the plan is really a great strategy these days to get that employee engagement. And also audit your processes for the background check process, for hiring and onboarding, because there are so many gaps that I identify in a process for clients that pretty easy to put a plan in place to solve for. And yeah, I think just making sure that it's consistent and equitable and fair, like we've been talking about, is also critical to ensure there's not a lack of consistency going on.
And yeah, it's a constant process from the moment that you're recruiting to the moment that they decide to retire or move on. So I love this. Becky, do you have any thoughts on what people should do or first steps they should take after this?
Yeah, I kind of in the same vein as Kelly. I think really defining and putting into place your feedback cycle and the ways that you're gathering, all of that feedback from your employees, as well as what to do with it afterwards. Excuse me. I know that, at GoCo, we use our team surveys kind of section. I got my notification this morning and it took me like, I don't know, 20 seconds to run through the questions and provide the feedback. And it's so important to have those spaces to hear it, right? Get the feedback and then do something about it and share it back. Sharing the trends that you're seeing and the outcomes and what actions you're going to take to really drive those items home, which is all, Kelly was talking about as well. So I 100% agree. Those are really kind of the first most important steps to take.
I love this. Thank you all so much. I know that we're coming to the time, and I do have one Q&A question, but I have one more final question I want to ask all three of you. And it is, what little nugget tidbit of information do you hope to either emphasize or leave people with today? We talked about a lot of different topics, a lot of great insight, but just would love to know kind of one thing you want to leave on. So Becky, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, of course. For me, I would say know who your team is, right? Know who your team is made up of, what's inspiring to them, what's motivating to them. What do they need as individuals? I think it was you, Kaylee, that mentioned earlier, like knowing how they like to be rewarded and, what is important to them, how they like to communicate and learn and grow. Those are the things that, as you put them together, really helps with the resilience and the success of both the individual and also the team and the productivity there. So, and it's so important to recognize that like every team is going to be a little different. What works perfectly for the HR startup that has like, 25 employees might not work quite as well at the 30-year-old construction company that has 500 employees. So making sure that you know what you're working with and kind of tailoring those things to fit individually for your circumstances, I would say that's a key takeaway to me.
Love that. Thank you, Becky. Kelly, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've been talking about there's a lot of gray in HR, and I think one of the things that can be a little bit more black and white, clear, crisp, is to have that process, documented SOPs for the background check, interviewing, hiring, onboarding process. And audit always sounds scary to people, but when you really break it down, it's just a series of steps, to make sure that your process is repetitive for every single new hire, and fair and consistent. So just coming up with that audit and making sure that, you train your HR team too on how to execute the proper process. And it's best in class HR. That's what we're trying to achieve, right? And so putting those practices into place will be just a game changer for a lot of organizations.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And finally, Sloan, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet so we can get to the Q&A questions as well. Please keep dropping your questions in there. But remember, I think is a key takeaway that resilience is a skill that can be cultivated intentionally, and you can help your teams become more resilient. So really, I think thinking about it as a muscle that does require developing the mindset and the habits so that employees and your team members can thrive under the pressure.
Man, some great knowledge. I love this so much. This is great. I do have one quick Q&A question that I want to get to, and I'll open it up to everyone. But sometimes, we're coworkers, we become friends. Toby asks, I'm very close with my colleagues. How can I explain to them though that I need to sometimes separate from friends to leader? Because it also shows they trust you a lot to be able to be friends, but how do you separate that? Who does anyone want to give this question a shot?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Oh, Becky, you came off first. Go
Go
for
ahead, Kelly.
it.
Totally.
Well, I was just going to say that, yeah, that can be challenging. And, in my opinion, integrity is everything in HR. And so explaining to your coworkers that it's really nothing that's personal. It's a higher level of, integrity and professionalism for an HR professional to make sure that they're not showing preferential treatment to one employee versus another. And sometimes that, can be the perception, whether it's reality or not. There's a perception that people have if you are quote unquote friends with other employees, right? And it's not to say you have to be robotic by any means, but to just being, cautious about how you do have those friendships in the workplace when you are in HR. And also asking your manager to help support you and, communicating that out to your team or to your colleagues that, this is a different role that you're in, and HR does have a different lane, as far as responsibility and things that are being asked of the other employees. So it can be tricky to navigate.
For sure. Thank you so much, Kelly. Becky, did you want to add anything?
Much of what Kelly said, totally agree. I feel for this question because I am that person that we love to be friends. We love to have the connection and the personal piece to it. But for me at least, I always try to remember I need to be the neutral party for everybody as well. And so keeping those lines and communicating them clearly and as Kelly said, being clear about, it's not about you, it's company policy. It needs to be followed, and this is what's going to happen. It's a hard conversation to have, but it's an important one too, to just set those boundaries and set those lines up.
Thank y'all for that. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who asked questions and everyone who attended. I'm going to share my screen just really quick so we can talk about our sponsors, and then I can get over those HRCI and SHRM codes to you all. But Sloan, do you mind just talking a little bit about Checkr for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Checkr, we are building the data platform that really will power safe and fair decisions. And so we are providing fast, accurate information back to our customers through innovation, technology, and really having this data platform to help our customers not only understand any risks to their business, but also ensure safety, fairness, and compliance. And we have, been growing over the past several years. We've gone now over to 100,000 customers, which is a huge milestone. And those customers range from, mom and pop shops, very small businesses where maybe they're only hiring one or two people a year, to large enterprises. And so we're just really excited to see the future of the space and be connected with GoCo.
Thank you so much, Sloan. We are very excited to be a part of Checkr 2 and our great integration that our two companies have together. GoCo is an all-in-one HRIS, as Becky mentioned earlier, so we really empower HR professionals to automate their manual tasks so that they can focus more on growing those happier, healthier, more productive teams. And I can't talk about GoCo without talking about our incredible client success team. Every client of GoCo gets a dedicated team to help with any HR related questions or processes that they might have. And I did just add a poll into the webinar. So if you want to learn more about GoCo, Checkr, both of us, our integration, anything, we are here to help you. And then if you do schedule a consultation with GoCo, then and set up a meeting, then we will send you a coffee gift card on us. As you can tell, I love coffee. I just want to drink all the coffee, have all the coffee with everyone. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you to our incredible speakers, Becky, Sloan, and Kelly. All of your insight was so incredible, and I hope that all of our attendees got some really great information from y'all. And to our attendees, thank you for taking an hour out of your crazy busy day to be with us and chat with us and learn with us. So thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.